good at this Zoom thing. But if you need a little refresher, you should be able to put your cursor down at the bottom of the screen, or maybe it's at the top. But if you have questions during this program, you can click the chat button and type in your questions. I think we'll hold the in-person virtual questions until the end, because I'm covering a lot, and I may answer your question during the show. So, and if I can't, since I'll be chatting, I may not be able to answer your question till the end, or Lindsay, our events coordinator, who's on here. Hi, Lindsay. She may also be able to answer your question in the meantime. And so if any of you, I know there's a lot of old friends here, welcome. And if any of you are new, the Willistown Conservation Trust has been around since the 1970s. We're a nonprofit land trust dedicated to preserving land in the Willistown area, particularly the Upper Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creek watersheds. And in addition to simply protecting land, we've protected 7,500 acres to date. We have some robust programs, including habitat stewardship, bird conservation, watershed protection, and regenerative farming. And I could sit here all night and explain what all those programs do, because it's a lot, but I won't bore you. Check out the website where you'll find how we use land to model how all these things can coexist. People, birds, wildlife, and water, and as well as food, can all exist harmoniously. That's our main goal to achieve through our modeling. And our other main mission is to inspire in people a lifelong love of nature. And that's what this program here tonight is pretty much aimed at, sort of remembering the wonder. So with that, I will share my screen here. Okay, so as I was preparing this presentation, I called it Fireflies, Moths, and Your Yard in the Dark. And I made it a little vague because I was going to talk about all those things because they're all exciting. But as I was sort of, I like doing some of these new programs. I've never done this program before. But sometimes when you do a new program, you make yourself learn new things. So I learned a lot about fireflies doing this, putting this presentation together. So it's mostly about fireflies and moths, and how you can help these creatures, particularly the fireflies in your backyard. I'm building suspense here. My why sometimes it does this, or it doesn't advance my slide. There we go. Okay, let me just. Okay, now it's going here. Takes a while to gear up, I guess. Okay, so fireflies are probably one of our most charismatic mini faunas, as Sarah Lewis says. She wrote this book. See if you can see it. It's called Silent Sparks. She's one of the top firefly researchers. And she said, fireflies might just be the best loved insects on Earth, time and again, magically rekindling our sense of wonder. And that's so true, especially now they are peaking. You can go outside in your yard and your yard has been transformed. Ordinary landscapes are transformed by the magic of these creatures. And it really awakens our sense of wonder. And it helps us remember, it brings us back to some of those childhood memories. I'm sure you all remember, and a lot of you children here today probably go out with a glass jar and capture these magical insects to see them up close. maybe even squish a few and put them on your face. I don't know what you kids are doing in quarantine, but it's exciting to interact with the night in this way and with these cool animals. So it's a celebrated insect all over the world. In Malaysia, they have 80,000 tourists that come from all over the world each year to see synchronous fireflies. They all light up at the same time. In Taiwan, they have 90,000 tourists coming for their wildflower, for their firefly tours. Wow, I think I'm mixing this presentation with the native wildflower talk that I just did last week. And then in Japan, they've really been revering fireflies for centuries in their art and poetry. There's an ancient belief that sacred spirits of people that have passed are manifest in the natural world. So they'll sit back and watch the fireflies very, very reverently. And then here in America, we have some of those synchronous fireflies. So these synchronous fireflies were really hidden until 1993 when they were revealed to the scientific world. So the village of Elkmont, Tennessee, the people who were living there before it was, way before it was a national park, this was all common knowledge. But the scientific community didn't know about this till 1993 when they revealed it, when one of the citizens revealed it to them, and the scientists couldn't believe it. They said, no, synchronous fireflies only exist over in Asia. They didn't believe it until they saw it. And it is incredible. So the scientific name of this specific type of firefly is Photinus carolinus. And it was on my bucket list. I was going to go this spring, and then COVID happened and they canceled all the tours. So 30,000 tourists in normal life before COVID would flock to the Great Smoky Mountains for 2 weeks every June to see this amazing display. And you can only buy tickets online. There's a shuttle service that takes you through Elkmont to the best viewing sites, and it sells out online within minutes. Hugely, hugely popular. And these fireflies are so amazing because they do 6 seconds of flashing consecutive, 6 flashes, and then 6 seconds of pause. But they all do it at the same time. For children on the program here, synchronous means at the same time. So it's probably amazing to see. I would love to see it someday. So fireflies are not flies at all. They're actually beetles. They're in the order, which is just sort of a clan, of Coleoptera, which is the beetles. There are some 400,000 beetle species on Earth. This makes up a quarter of all the animals on Earth are beetles. And what makes these beetles in the order Coleoptera is they are the sheath-winged insects. And what that means, you look at this picture in the lower right, you see that it looks like there's 4 wings. So the 2 forewings, the ones in the front, are a hard covering that protects the delicate hind wings. And this is something that all the insects in Coleoptera, the beetle species, have in common. Now, when you get further towards species, so kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I remember that from my, I think, memology class in college. That's how you remember the rankings. So the family that the fireflies are in is Lampyridae, which is a type of beetle. So Lampyridae, all of the Lampyridae, the fireflies, have bioluminescence, and not all of them glow in the adult stage, as we'll find out a little later. But they're in this family means they glow at least at some point in their life, even if it's just the larva or the pupa. before the adult stage. So bio is Greek for living, and luminescence comes from Latin for lumens, which means light. So bioluminescence literally means living light. 2, they are squishy. So compared to other beetles that you see, you think of a beetle, you might think of that Japanese beetle in your yard or something along those lines. They're usually tough and hard. Most of their body is that exoskeleton. But in relation to most beetles, the fireflies are pretty soft bodies, pretty soft bodied. So the second characteristic here in the list is that they are squishy. They carry a shield. So if you can see in the picture, this head shield, so they're sort of like turtles. If you Google fireflies online, some of the pictures, like from the top, will look like they don't have eyes, but they're really tucked under this head shield. So they can kind of like put their head back in there like a turtle. So it's a hard shield. And then the fourth thing that the Lampieridae all have in common is that they have a common ancestor dating 26 million years ago in the Jurassic period with the dinosaurs. So, and they know this because they found 2 fireflies actually mating, forever sealed in love in amber. So a piece of amber. So they were around during the Jurassic period, but they probably were not, they weren't the flashing adults that we see now. They might have just lit up as the larval form. So getting down to the fireflies, a lot of people are surprised to find that there's a lot of firefly species. There's 2,000 species all across the world. They're found on every continent except for Antarctica, which is obviously too cold. There's 120 species in North America, and there's 350 species in Brazil. So you can see they like as the warmer it gets, the more species, just like everything else. The tropical latitudes often have a boom of biodiversity. So even in North America, the warmer states like Georgia and Florida are the ones that are going to have the most species of fireflies, whereas Alaska has only 1 species. So looking at this picture here, we've got Photinus pyrillus. He's up here. That's your general. If you go out tonight after this and you find get some fireflies in a jar, that's the one that that common eastern firefly. This is a cool one I read about. The blue ghost firefly is actually it makes a creepy blue light, and it flies really low along the ground, just zigzagging, and it doesn't really flash. It's just this blue light. So if you see it, I think it's in the Southern Appalachians, but if you see it, you would think it's a little blue ghost or a little fairy. Kind of cool. So the firefly types, there's the most common one that we think of is the lightning bug firefly. That's like the common eastern firefly that I said you'd go out and find after this. And then there's, so the lightning bug firefly is the one that you see when you go outside and you see them all flashing, they're flying and flashing. Those are the males broadcasting to the females, which are often perched in the grass and not doing as flashy of a display back. They're just doing a slow glow response to the males. The other type is the glowworm firefly. Now, Northern Europe mostly has these glowworm fireflies. That's this guy in the lower right. Well, actually, that's a lady. So the females of this species are very large and sort of stationary. And they shine that sort of steady glow as a lantern for the males. And the males of this species are pretty tiny, and they are flighted, and they're also unlit. So this is the sort of Northern Europe type of firefly. And then lastly, there's dark fireflies, which fly around during the day. That's the one in the upper right. They fly around in the day. And they don't, of course, use flashes because it wouldn't do any good when they're flying around during the day. No one would see the flashes. The females wouldn't see. So the males seek out the females by her wind-blown perfume. So there's dark lightning bug, glowworm, and dark fireflies. So here's the common eastern firefly, as I pointed out in the previous chart. They have these very, very parallel lines. They're very tiny. They're only 15 millimeters. So just like teensy, teensy. And their legs are kind of short. But these are very common. They're active at dusk. They're pretty ubiquitous east of the Rocky Mountains. But for some reason, the western states don't have many fireflies at all, except for in some secluded pockets, and scientists really don't know why. And even actually in the 1950s, the cities of Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, actually tried to take an eastern population of this common eastern firefly and relocate it to the parks in those cities because they wanted to bring that magic that we have in the night, and the populations didn't take, and they don't know why. Of course, we know it's not a great idea to try and reintroduce species to new habitats because you just never know what chain of events that'll put through the food web. But anyway, those didn't take. But just keep that in mind. We're really lucky to have these beautiful fireflies lighting up our night because half of the United States doesn't. So the fireflies, when you see them flying around, you're seeing just the tip of the iceberg of their life, and you're just seeing the end of the life, sadly. They undergo complete metamorphosis. So this is something that half of the animal kingdom does. Every bee, ant, butterfly, moth, firefly, beetle, they all go through this complete metamorphosis, which means that the adult form is totally different than the juvenile. And what that does, natural selection favored that because this makes it so that the adults and the juveniles can occupy different habitats and use different resources and have different jobs. And so for the firefly, the juvenile stage, that's this one here, the larva. So they start as an egg for a couple weeks in the egg. The female lays the egg in some damp moss. It hatches, and out comes this larva that eats and eats and eats and grows and grows and grows. That's its job. Eat, grow. Gorge itself, basically. And shed its skin as it gets too big for the skin and keep growing. And the adult form, their job, the ones you see flying around, their job is just to mate. Find a mate and put your genes forth. And maybe disperse a little, but they really don't do a whole lot of dispersing. So this is the pupa. So the larva is underground for 1 to 3 years. They spend 1 to 3 years underground, eating other insects, the soft-bodied insects like and other snails and earthworms. Earthworms are their favorite, especially. And this is a long period, 1 to 3 years. They'll hibernate through the winter, so they'll sort of go dormant, but when spring comes, they'll be active again underground and feeding and shedding that skin and growing. And the pupa, finally, when they get big enough and get enough resources, these little weird zombie-looking things on the right are the pupa. And so inside the pupa, lots going on. Body parts are getting rearranged just like a butterfly in a chrysalis. And then out pops the monarch. So this out pops the adult firefly after 2 to 3 weeks. So firefly larvae, I was surprised to learn how fierce carnivores they are. They have really strong jaws, and they'll take down prey multiple sizes bigger than it, like this snail you see. So what it's doing, it's biting the snail and injecting paralyzing neurotoxins and then injecting digestive enzymes. So the animal's paralyzed, and then the larva basically slurps it up. So this larva is about to have some snail soup, is what you're seeing, and they'll feed on it for a few days. Now this is probably, full disclosure, I don't have any good pictures of fireflies. I can take pictures of birds, but not fireflies. So these are all from the internet, full disclosure. So this larva is just gonna eat that snail. And so that, and as I was saying, this larva is most likely a European glowworm because they actually spend their larvalhood, their childhood, above ground foraging. And so a lot more is known about the European glowworm larva, whereas the larvae of our North American fireflies spend the majority of our lives cryptically underground. So there's still lots to learn about. One thing that's interesting are these larval lights. So if you disturb the larva or even the pupa, the vibrations cause them to light up. And this is another natural selection favored trait. So they're toxic, and the lights are a training. They train predators with the lights, much the same as the monarch butterfly. The bright orange and black color is training predators not to eat them because they're toxic. They're warning. It's a warning signal. But because these larvae, the firefly larvae, are underground in the dark, bright colors obviously wouldn't ward off any predators because you can't see that in the dark. And so they evolved these lights, which the predators can see. And firefly predators would include like birds, toads, mice, and bats. All of these in experiments show an aversion reaction to fireflies and the larva. And they learn that the light signals, this thing tastes terrible. Not only do they taste terrible, but they smell terrible. So they're not palatable at all. And that is what the larval light is shining light on. It wasn't until millions of years after that first ancestor that the larval lights were borrowed for the adult courtship signal. So, and this is totally different. The larva goes through the pupal stage, and the adult has a totally different lantern than that larval light. It's a new organ. So it's crazy how evolution worked. And finally, something was tweaked. Hey, why don't we use this to bring courtship to a new level? And it did. So the adult emerges from the ground, and the adult does not eat. Much like some of our moths that we'll see later, they have to survive off of the fuel that they acquired gorging themselves as a larva. And so as a result, the adult fireflies only live a few weeks, and their main goal is to find mates. So there's 35 different species of Photinus. Photinus is the most common firefly. As we mentioned before, there's actually 35 different specific species. So this just keeps getting more complicated. But this is cool how scientists have mapped out. So here's just a selection of a few different fireflies and their distinctive flash patterns. They all have distinctive flash patterns and flight paths that the female can distinguish as her own species. Remember, she's just sitting down here on a blade of grass watching this display, and she needs to know what her species is, so it needs to be very specific. So it's much the same as birds. So the male birds are singing and the female is just silent and conducting this orchestra, but she can decipher her own species. Even if she couldn't see, she can decipher based on that bird's specific song. So it's similar. It's like these are visual songs almost, you can think of it as. So here's that creepy blue ghost that I told you about, where it just does the blue light that doesn't go off. And then, let's see, here's the synchronous firefly, where they do the 6 flashes and then 6 seconds of off. They all do that silent period together, and then 6 flashes on. So kind of cool. And then this is the Photinus pyrillus, the common eastern firefly, is also named the Big Dipper firefly because they do this skywriting. So they light up and then they sort of speed up and go down and up, like up a slope, and it makes a J. So they call it the Big Dipper firefly. That one's really distinct. When you go out, you'll see some of those dipping down and going up. So this is the end point. They finally find a female. So timing is everything. The males are flashing their hearts out and the females just sitting there watching and looking for the good males. And when she sees a male that is desirable, she will respond with a perfectly timed flash. So the delay between when he flashes and she responds is also species specific, so that he knows that she is his species. So there's this dialogue going on at night between the male and females of this crazy creature. So then we have male biased sex ratios for the most part. So the author of that book, Silent Sparks, Sarah Lewis, did an experiment and found that for every 12 females in a New England meadow, there's 200 males. So females are hard to come by. The males are cheaper. Sorry, guys. But the males actually emerge before the females do. Their metamorphosis takes a shorter amount of time, so it's more expensive to be a female. There's less females. They have to, one of the reasons why they're just sitting while the males are flying around competing is because they have to save energy to make eggs. And so that's how it evolved, that the females are the chooser and the males are the competitors in this high stakes game. So once the male finds a female that is responding, then the dialogue picks up. They have to keep doing back and forth to find each other, because remember, it's pitch black. And so when he finally finds her, they scramble up a blade of grass and mate. They go back to back like that. And they stay that way all night. And so they only take one mate each night. And that ensures for the male that his genes are the ones going forward. Because if they broke up in the middle of the night, she may go off and find another suitor. So this is all just ensuring your genes go forward in this genetic arms race. So, but then later in the season, it's interesting because the males emerge so much sooner than the females, and they're really putting their lives on the line out there, flying around the meadow with predators. So a lot of them get eaten. Out of 199 male fireflies, only 2 will survive and find females. I had to read that twice. I said, is that for real? That's crazy. But, you know, like I said, bats, birds, mice, toads, they all have an aversion to fireflies. However, there are some creatures like the wolf spiders and the orb weavers, the assassin bugs, and the harvest men. Harvest men are also known as daddy longlegs, which are not spiders. They have 6 legs. But anyway, all of those don't care that the fireflies are toxic. It doesn't bother them, and they will readily eat firefly prey. And it's interesting, not all spiders like fireflies. Jumping spiders have that same aversion reflexes, you know, wiping their faces or vomiting, that the toads and mice do to eating fireflies. So the jumping spiders are a little more discerning than the other spiders. So anyway, picture a field, lots of spiders. The fireflies are flying around with their minds focused on one thing, which is mating. So they often get ensnared in the webs and killed. But later on in the season, because so many of them get killed, So later on, maybe if you go like later on this month, when there's less fireflies and we pass the peak, what happens is it becomes a female bias ratio. So now there are more females and hardly any males. And so then the females aren't very picky. And you can go out this time with a pen light and flash it, and you can talk to the female fireflies and they'll flash back because they're desperate. They're no longer passively sitting on their bar stools. They are going for anything that flashes. So that's really interesting. The females then become the competitors. So then the other things that the fireflies need to watch out for are other fireflies. So I said there's lots of different species of fireflies. There's some scientists call them the femme fatale firefly, or the vampire firefly, but this is Photurus. So we were talking about Photinus before, and now we're on Photurus. And the way I remember that is Photinus has what sounds like tiny. So they're the tinier ones, Photinus, and the Photurus are the big ones, bigger than 15 millimeters. And so I mentioned that fireflies are toxic. They have this toxic steroid called lucibufagins. Try and say that 10 times fast. But that's what the Photinus fireflies contain. But the Photurus, actually, they found they don't have this toxic steroid. So they don't have that defense. They don't have that chemical defense against predators. And so the Photurus, she becomes carnivorous. After she mates, she then changes her lantern to this deceptive lure. So there's crazy stuff going on out there. The male fireflies, Photinus, are getting stuck in webs, and they're trying to find the females. And then you got the vampire fireflies of different species. So the Photurus, they're amazing deceptors. So they can actually mimic whatever of the 35 Photinus species are around. The big Photurus female, she can somehow imitate that flash pattern. So the Photinus males are flashing in the field, hoping for a flashback from a Photinus female. But instead, the Photurus flashes back. And he doesn't know the difference. So he comes in thinking that he's going to get a mate, and instead he becomes a meal. So she bites him and drinks his blood and then eats his body parts. And she may eat a few of these each night. And so then she gets the lucibufagins, that toxic steroid, integrated into her body. And so now she has that chemical defense. And her stakes are higher because she has just she's mated, and so now she needs those defenses. So she eats the Photinus to gain those. So pretty crazy. It's a crazy world out there, those fireflies. So there are a lot of threats to fireflies aside from the spiders and the other fireflies. It's us. So of course, habitat loss is a major threat. That's happening with birds, insects. Habitat loss is occurring at, higher speeds than ever before. There's 48 million acres of lawn. And these guys are particularly susceptible to habitat loss because, as I said, they really don't disperse much. So from egg to the adult firefly, that may only be a few meters difference. The egg and the larva develops underground and may squirm around for like a few meters, eating all those prey items, and then pupate and emerges an adult just a few meters from where its egg was. So that means that these are really local extinctions are prevalent with this type of animal that doesn't disperse. So if you have any type of habitat disturbance, so major landscaping, golf courses, you're disturbing the soil where the larvae and the eggs are. You're probably disturbing the adults as well. Or if you're not killing off those, then you may be killing off their prey items like the earthworms and the snails. And then there's other major habitat loss going on around the world, like in Malaysia, where some of those synchronous fireflies are. So the synchronous fireflies in Malaysia set up in mangrove trees by the stream banks. And they're taking down some of those mangrove trees and disturbing the stream banks with things like palm oil production or shrimp aquaculture, or even just bad touristry practices. The people that are coming to see the fireflies may not totally know their life history and be respectful to it. So we have habitat loss occurring. We have light pollution. So much of the surface of the earth today, because of human technology, dark skies are largely gone. And we need to, everybody's trying to light up their yards at night, and there's many reasons for this, but we need to remember that, when we do this, it is at the expense of another organism. So light pollution for fireflies interferes with the bioluminescent detection. So they did experiments of glowworms in a little Swiss town in Europe. And the female glowworms, if they set up under a street lamp, they didn't mate because the males couldn't see their signals. It really has an effect on the populations. And then, of course, pesticides. Some lawns are applying more pesticides per acre than agriculture in the United States. And these broad spectrum pesticides that companies will tell you only kill certain insects, they don't discriminate. They're killing anything it comes into contact with. So, and again, if it's not killing the firefly itself and all of its life stages, it might be killing some of its food items. So what can we do? We can create inviting firefly habitat. So we can mow less. So if you mow less, then what happens is the soil is better able to retain moisture. And then also the grass is kind of their mating platform. You see the females go up the blades of grass. So mowing less, leaving the leaf litter and woody debris. This creates habitat for the larva and the pupa stages. So not being so neat with everything. And preserving moist areas for egg laying. Preserving mossy areas near stream banks or ponds. You can also minimize light pollution. You want to, this is what a lot of the McMansions look like now. We want to show off our trees at night, or we're afraid of bad men coming to steal our things in the night. And like Doug Tallamy said, I watched a talk recently of his, and he said, if you use motion sensor lights, you'll be surprised how much the bad man does not come to your house. And that'll surprise him even more if he does come and the light flicks on. So use timers or motion sensors. Try to use only what you need, the lowest wattage possible. Sometimes yellow LED, they say, LED lights are not, the yellow LED is not attractive to insects. Not that the fireflies are attracted to the light per se, but other insects are, like moths. Use shielded light fixtures and make sure your lights are pointing down instead of up into the sky aimlessly. I saw, going back to that, I was driving through a residential neighborhood and I saw a truck they were installing lighting, and it said their slogan was "We own the night." And I thought, no, we don't. We're just borrowing the night. So keep that in mind. Reduce pesticides. Avoid all those broad spectrum pesticides. Use them only if there's a problem. Don't go for the routine pesticide application that the companies would have you do. Try to use organic products or insecticidal bacteria that targets pests like mosquitoes. Those little mosquito donuts that you can put in standing bodies of water work great. They just give off a natural bacteria that kills the mosquito larva. Avoid weed and feed herbicides, which kills off things like earthworms that the fireflies, the larvae, eat. And then here are, just to end our Firefly portion here, some resources. My favorite children's books, Sam the Firefly, The Very Lonely Firefly. They're great if you kids haven't read them yet. SilentSparks.com is the author of the book that I've been talking about, and that has some really great resources, like a blog, and then Firefly Watch. I'll try and do this, and hopefully I'll be able to successfully go back to my PowerPoint, but that's questionable. So this is Firefly Watch. You can join this and just go and watch the fireflies and count them. And they give you all kinds of little tutorial videos and how to identify which species, and you just count them. And there's this cool part, view and explore data. Firefly observation data. And here's a neat map they just started. So here we're in the week of June 22nd, and you can see lighting up here. These are, it's a visualization of the firefly reports that they've been getting, much like you can go on eBird and see this sort of thing for bird migration. So that's pretty cool. Let's see. Oh, wow, I got back to my presentation. So, get lost on these things. And I encourage you to just go out in the night and explore these amazing creatures. Just go out with a net and a glass jar and check them out. See what species you have. It's interesting. You can actually see, you can tell male and female. So this is the Photinus. So if you catch one in a jar, look at its underside, and this is its lantern. On the last two segments, these are the parts that light up. That's the male. And the female lantern is much smaller. It's basically just a dot. It's just a little dot here on this second to last segment. And also, for some reason, the male's eyes stick out further in the Photinus. And then the Photorus, that's that big vampire one. She has, her lantern it's still the last two segments, takes up the last two segments, but it's only a portion of those segments, if you can see the white. And then the male would extend, the lantern part would be all the way to the margins. So kind of interesting. But make sure when you catch fireflies and you get a big one that you think is Photorus, probably don't want to put it in with your Photinus, because she may have mated and be looking for a toxic treat. So then just a little about moths. You can also go out and explore the moths in your yard at night. Oops, somebody raised their hand. Oh, now I can't see it. Sorry, I can't click on your hand raise. just a few more slides here and then we'll go to questions. So Butterflies and Moths of North America is a great resource. If you can just set up a porch light to see what moths are around. Or you can set up a sheet with a UV light, or with moths are really attracted to mercury vapor lights. Now this is a sheet in the tropics. You're not going to get that kind of diversity here. But it's a good way to explore what moths are in your backyard. And here is the Butterflies and Moths of North America website, which you can register for. And if you get a picture of the moths that you find, you can submit it. You can also use this to help you identify. There's a species database. So you can type in, I'm going to do the Luna moth because everybody loves the Luna moth. Comes up here. Okay, there it is. And you can see it tells you everything about the range. It tells you the caterpillar host. It tells you when it flies, May to July in the north. So it gives you all kinds of great information to help you learn more about these guys. Of course, we have a dizzying array of moth species. There's 1,000 species of butterflies and like 11,000 species of moths. And of course, because they're out at night, like the fireflies, much isn't known about them. Not as much anyway as the butterflies. But we do have a dizzying diversity in North America, 11,000 species. This is one of my favorites, the Io moth. It opens and shows those owl eyes. And so moths are important. They're pollinators. They're the night shift of Earth's pollination industry. So after the bees and butterflies are asleep, the moths come out, and 1 in every 3 bites of food you eat depends on insect pollination. They are food web drivers. So the caterpillars are really important for bird food, essentially. 96% of our land birds feed their young caterpillars of butterflies and moths. They're indicator species, the moths, because they're so prevalent everywhere. If you see a decline in a certain area over time, that could indicate something with the climate or the habitat. So animals that are out at night develop, as we saw with the firefly, some really interesting defenses. This is a sphinx, or what was that? A tiger moth. It's a tiger moth that can actually use ultrasonic clicks to jam a bat's radar, because a bat would love to eat this moth. Sphinx or hawk moths, this is the same family that the hummingbird moth belongs to. These moths clock in some of the fastest flying insects, 33 miles per hour. This is a diurnal moth you might see around your garden if you have some good plants. And they're masters of camouflage. This moth looks like a leaf rolled up. So also really incredible creatures. Everything that you do to help fireflies also helps moths. So remember that a lot of moths, like this Luna moth, are similar to the firefly, the adult firefly, in that they don't have mouth parts. They're just living a few weeks off of the reserves from when it was a larva. So you don't want these moths wasting energy at your light that you leave on all night. So being mindful about lights. Plant natives. So the larval form of moths are host plant specialists. Fireflies are carnivorous as larvae, but the moths are herbivorous. So they eat plants, and they are host plant specialists. So the more native plants you plant, the more moth species you can attract. So like 500 species of butterflies and moths use the oak plant, oak tree, whereas only 5 will use a non-native ginkgo. And of course, minimizing pesticides. minimize light pollution, as I mentioned previously, and leave the leaf litter. So this is a polyphemus moth. So if you're doing everything right, you've got native plants, and you're turning off your lights at night, and then you get rid of all your leaf litter, or mow right up to the trees, then you may be getting rid of the full life cycle. So when they pupate, these moths, many moths will go into the leaf litter. So, and again, if you remember back from the fireflies, I said, if you leave the leaf litter, it helps their larval populations. So that's all I have about fireflies and moths. I think I covered everything. I probably forgot some things. But our next event is Plastic Free July next Wednesday at, it's a lunch and learn, so 12 to 1. And Lauren McGrath, she is our watershed program director. She's going to talk about plastics in the age of COVID-19 and what we can do to be better about that. All right, so with that, we'll open it up. You guys can unmute yourself and ask any questions, or let me know if something wasn't clear, or just chat.
Hey Blake, what is there any, do they understand why and how they do synchronization, those lights?
Yeah, so, well, it's some kind of like chemical, I didn't get into all that, but the why, they have a couple theories. One is that when they're in areas, when fireflies are in large densities, as they are, you see thousands of these synchronous fireflies in the Smokies. When it's in such a big density, you could confuse the female. The females can get overloaded if everybody's going at different times. So they think evolution favored having them all go together, because then the female knows, okay, these are all my species. And the females are picking out, so much like birds, the females are paying attention to subtle differences of the males within their species. So it's easier if she can identify, okay, these are all my species. Now let me pick the one that is the most attractive to me, which for a firefly is the longer duration or a faster pulse rate. So basically, the more conspicuous a male firefly, the more attractive it is to the female. So that's how this long duration synchronous firefly might have evolved. And then another theory is that when all the males go together and then there's this 6-second silent dark period, then they can see the female's response better. If thousands of fireflies are lighting up the woods, it's going to be hard. It's like light pollution, and then it's hard for the males to see what females are flashing back at them. Good question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Keith. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How do fireflies light up?
How do they light up?
Mm-hmm.
It's a special chemical called luciferase. So it's just a special bodily function that they have with a special chemical that only beetles in the firefly family have.
Wow.
And it's the same chemical that some marine animals use. So it's pretty crazy. And I don't know that they understand it fully. They're still learning a lot about fireflies. Good question. Yeah. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
How many colors can moths be?
What's that?
I have a question.
How many colors can moths be?
Like, how many different colors are moths, or how many different species?
Well, there's 11,000 species of moths in North America alone. So there's all different colors. The pictures I showed just scratch the surface of the diversity. I mean, and some moths are plain and boring. If you put a feed out at night, you might mostly just see the plain, boring brown ones, but they're all different species. And a good guide to get if you want to start identifying some of the moths you find is the Peterson Moth Guide, or use that Butterflies and Moths of North America. But yeah, it's a dizzying array. Another thing you can do to attract moths to study them besides lights is making moth bait. And that's what, if any of you guys, there's some Russian nature keepers on here, we would make moth bait out of sugar, molasses, beer, and like old bananas. And you let that ferment for a while and you paint the trees. So if you're doing this at home, you want to make the bait, let it sit for a few days to a week, and then you would go out and at dusk paint the trees, and then wait a few hours, like till it gets pretty late, and then go out and use flashlights. Probably try and use red light so you're not scaring them off, but just shine it and look and see if any of the moths are feeding on the sugar bait. So not all moth adults are mouthless. Some of them do eat and nectar. That's why they're very important pollinators. So they're attracted to sugar. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Hold on.
How do bats fly?
How do bats fly?
Well, we were Blake, just to give you a little context, we were talking about bats, and if like as a nighttime species, do bats eat moths or fireflies?
Well, bats want to eat, they would much rather eat a moth than a firefly, because the fireflies have a toxin in them that makes them unpalatable. So it makes them taste really yucky. So they've done experiments where they've fed bats firefly or offered it to him, and if the bat had never seen the firefly before, wasn't able to recognize it as a yucky food item, and so it ate it, and then it had a reflex, like it was wiping its mouth with its wings, or it threw up. So we know that bats do not like fireflies, but they do like moths. And I don't know of any moths that are toxic, but I don't know, there's a lot of moth species, and I'm not a moth expert. But I think that's more of a butterfly thing. Some butterflies are toxic, like the monarch butterfly. If a blue jay eats a monarch, it will kind of gag. And then it will never eat that monarch, that same type of species again, because it's that bright orange and black. So you're educating these animals with these flags, whether it's the light of the firefly or the bright colors of the monarch butterfly. They're educating potential predators against eating them.
Family.
Good question.
Is there any fireflies will come out at daytime?
Or moths that come out in the daytime.
Yeah, there's a hummingbird moth, and actually I had a picture of that one in there. So here we go. So have you ever seen this moth before? Some people say it looks like a lobster with wings. It's like a tiny little lobster hovering around. It's very small, but it hovers like a hummingbird. And here in this picture, it's drinking from a milkweed.
You need to press share, Blake.
Oh. It says I'm screen sharing.
Maybe.
Can you see that?
You are. Yep, you are.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Yeah, so they'll fly during the day, but most moths are nocturnal. What else did you ask?
That was our question.
Okay. Any other questions out there, or
I have a question.
Yeah, who's that?
Me.
For some reason I can't see everyone here.
It's James.
Go to share screen. Or not share screen.
Oh, stop.
Are fireflies declining?
I'm still trying to see your face here. Oh, here, I need to enlarge this. Here we go. Now maybe I can see.
No, we have a broken camera.
We have
Oh, they can be black anyway. I was scrolling through trying to find a face that was talking. Yes, that anecdotally, it's declining. Their firefly populations. A lot of people remember, older people remember seeing a lot more in their childhood. And it's again because those three main things: the habitat loss, light pollution, and pesticides. And then there's also climate change that could be affecting fireflies, and they don't exactly know what effects that may have on their populations right now. But
okay.
we know that they're very susceptible to drought. They need wet areas, wet woodlands, wet meadows, stream banks. So if drought becomes a thing in the future with climate change, that could blink out some of their lightning bug populations. But yes, they're generally insects are unfortunately declining.
Oh, okay.
Are also butterflies declining?
Probably yes. Yes is the easy answer to all that question all the time. Unfortunately. There's a lot of people in the world today, and we're taking up a lot of space, which means that everything else is running out of space. So that's why we need to be more mindful about the things we do in our yards, because our yards could be forces for good instead of add to the habitat loss.